I killed my father with silence. I let him rot in a sterile Florida sunroom, starving his heart until he signed over every cent to me, cutting my siblings out of a life they actually deserved. The Florida heat is a different kind of monster. It doesn't just burn, it suffocates. It's heavy like the guilt I've spent 3 years burying under high-end real estate commissions and oceanfront views. My father, Elias, was 88 when I moved him into the Palms. It's a luxury facility, the kind that smells like lemon bleach and expensive despair. I told my sister, Sarah, in June that it was the best place for his dementia. I told my brother, Mark, that I'd handle the logistics because I was the only one still living in West Palm Beach. That was the first lie. It's the first of many. I'm a real estate broker. I know how to sell a vision. I sold them the vision of a peaceful twilight for our father, while I secretly began the process of erasing them from his mind. It started with the phone calls. Sarah would call from Chicago, her voice bright and hopeful. "How's Dad today, David? Can I speak to him?" I'd look at the caller ID, then look at my father sitting in his armchair, staring at a blank television screen. I wouldn't hand him the phone. Instead, I'd wait for it to stop ringing, then tell him, "Sarah called, Dad. She said she's too busy to visit this Christmas. Something about a promotion." The look in his eyes, that slow, agonizing crumble of a man who realized he was no longer a priority. That was my fuel. I needed him to feel abandoned. I needed him to believe that I was the only one who stayed, the only one who cared. Every week the letters would come. June sent photos of her kids. Mark sent postcards from his travels. I kept them all, not in a scrapbook, in the trunk of my Lexus tucked under the spare tire. I'd sit in the parking lot of the Palms, the engine idling, the air conditioning blasting, and I'd read them. I'd read about my niece's piano recitals. I'd read about Mark's new house in Seattle. Then I'd walk into room 412, sit across from my father and tell him the mail was empty again. "People move on, Dad," I'd whisper, patting his frail, translucent hand. "But I'm here. I'm always here." You have to understand the resentment. Sarah is a surgeon. Mark owns a tech firm. June married into old money. And me? I'm the one who stayed in this humidity, selling stucco houses to retirees while my siblings flew over us at 30,000 feet. I was the local son, the backup plan. I decided I wouldn't be the backup plan for the inheritance. Elias wasn't just a father. He was a gatekeeper to $30 million in offshore accounts and commercial property. Money that Sarah didn't need. Money that Mark would just waste on another startup. Money that belonged to the son who stayed to change his diapers and listen to his repetitive stories about the Korean War. But listening isn't what I did. I manipulated the silence. By the second year, he stopped asking about them. The light in his eyes had gone from a flickering candle to a cold, dead ash. He began to cling to me with a desperate, pathetic grip. Whenever I'd get up to leave, he'd seize my wrist, his skin like wet parchment. "Don't go, David, you're all I have left." I'd smile, a practiced, comforting mask. "I won't leave you, Dad, not like they did." I started bringing the lawyer around in the third year. Not our family lawyer, of course. A man I knew from the country club. A man who didn't ask questions as long as the check cleared. We'd sit in that small room, the sun beating through the blinds, casting stripes of light across the floor like the bars of a cage. The air was always too thin in there. Your father seems confused, the lawyer had said during the first meeting. He's just heartbroken, I replied. His other children have cut him off. He wants to ensure his legacy goes to the one who stood by him. I watched my father stare at the documents. He couldn't read the fine print anymore. He just looked at the lines where the names used to be. Sarah, Mark, June, all gone, replaced by one name, mine. Sign here, Dad. It's for your protection. He looked at me, his eyes clouded with cataracts and sorrow. They really aren't coming, are they? His voice was a ghost, a rasp of dry leaves. No, Dad, they aren't. The pen trembled in his hand. It took him nearly a minute to form the E. The ink bled into the paper. With every stroke, I felt a surge of triumph so sharp it was almost sickening. I was winning. I was finally the favorite. But as he finished the last letter of his name, he did something he hadn't done in months. He looked directly into my soul, not at the broker, not at the caregiver. He looked at the boy who used to hide in the closet when he came home angry. David, he whispered, I know. My heart stopped. The air in the room vanished. Know what, Dad? He didn't answer. He just closed his eyes and leaned his head back against the vinyl chair. The lawyer gathered the papers, nodding. It's done. It was done. The betrayal was codified. The theft was legal. I walked out of that room feeling like a god, ignoring the hollow ache in my chest that told me I had just buried a living man. I didn't know then that the silence I had built around him was about to become my own prison. I didn't know that this death I had orchestrated was only the beginning of a much deeper, much darker rot. The documents sat in the trunk of my car for 3 weeks, right next to the pile of unopened mail from my siblings. Every time I hit a speed bump, I could hear them shifting, a soft paper-thin rustle that sounded like a dry cough. My father's life was reduced to a few reams of 20-pound bond paper. I didn't tell my sisters about the new will. I didn't tell Mark. Instead, I sent a group text. Dad's fading. The doctors say he's mostly nonverbal now. It's best if you don't call as much. The ringing agitates him. I was curating a vacuum. I was building a wall of static around a dying man, and I was the only one who held the frequency. I went back to the Palms on a Tuesday. The humidity was so thick, it felt like breathing through a wet wool blanket. Inside, the air conditioning was set to a bone-chilling 65 degrees. I found him in the courtyard, staring at a fountain that wasn't running. He looked smaller. It's a terrifying thing, watching your father shrink until he's just a collection of sharp angles and translucent skin. Hey, Dad, I said, sitting on the stone bench next to him. He didn't turn. His hands were folded in his lap, the knuckles swollen like knots in an old rope. I brought you some magazines, real estate journals. Thought you'd like to see the new listings on the coast. I was mocking him, really, showing him the world I was going to buy with his ghost. He didn't look at the magazines. He didn't look at me. The letters, David, he whispered. My heart skipped. The trunk of my car felt like it was miles away, yet I could smell the ink on those envelopes as if they were in my pocket. What letters, Dad? The ones they sent. Sarah, Mark, the little one. He meant June. He always called her the little one. I told you, Dad. They haven't sent anything. They're busy. You know how it is. I reached out to pat his shoulder, but he flinched. It wasn't a big movement, just a tiny, reflexive jerk of the skin, but it felt like a slap. I'm the only one here, I reminded him, my voice hardening. I'm the one paying the bills. I'm the one checking on your meds, not them. I needed the resentment to stay fresh. I needed him to be angry at them so I wouldn't have to be angry at myself. But he just stared at the dry fountain. It's a long way to go, he said, into the dark, all by yourself. I left him there. I drove to a beach access point, parked the car and opened the trunk. The sun was setting, bleeding orange and purple over the Atlantic. I took the stack of letters, over 40 of them, and a lighter I kept in the glove box. One by one, I set them on fire in a small metal trash can near the dunes. I watched Sarah's handwriting curl and blacken. I watched a photo of June's youngest son, a boy I'd never met, melt into a puddle of gray ash. The smell of burning paper mixed with the salt air. It was the smell of a family being erased. I felt a strange cold ecstasy. I was the keeper of the truth. I was the one who decided what was real for him. I was God in a cheap suit. But that night, I couldn't sleep. The silence in my own house felt different. It wasn't peaceful. It was heavy. It was the silence of a house where no one is allowed to speak. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. It was a FaceTime request from Mark. I declined it. He called again immediately. I declined it again. Then a text. David, pick up. I called the facility. And they said Dad hasn't been out of his room in 3 days. They said he's refusing to eat. What the hell is going on? Panic surged through me. The nurses were talking. The wall was cracking. I typed back with shaking fingers. He's depressed, Mark. He thinks you guys abandoned him. I can't force him to eat. If you actually cared, you'd be here instead of interrogating me. I was gaslighting my own brother to protect a bank account. The next morning, I went back to the Palms. I didn't go to the reception desk. I went straight to room 412. The room was dim. The curtains were drawn tight against the Florida sun. Elias was in bed, his chest rising and falling in shallow, jagged hitches. He looked like a skeleton covered in silk. Dad? He didn't move. I sat on the edge of the bed. The room smelled of stale air and something metallic. Blood? No, just the smell of a body shutting down. Dad, Mark called. He's worried. I don't know why I said it. Maybe a part of me wanted to give him a reason to live, or maybe I just wanted to see if I could still manipulate the ghost. Elias opened his eyes. They weren't clouded anymore. They were terrifyingly clear. Did he? Elias whispered. Yes. And Sarah? She asks about you. He reached out and grabbed my hand. His grip was surprisingly strong. It was the grip of a man drowning. David, he said, his voice cracking. I'm sorry. I froze. For what, Dad? For being sick? He shook his head slowly. For your mother, for what I did to her. I didn't understand. My mother died 20 years ago. A long illness, a quiet passing. That was the story we all told. What are you talking about? He pulled me closer, his breath smelling of decay and old secrets. I thought, if I let you do this, if I let you take it all, maybe we'd be even. Lol. My skin went cold. The I know from the signing day. It wasn't about the letters. It wasn't about the will. It was about something much older, something buried deeper than a trunk full of burnt mail. "Dad, you're confused. Just rest." "The floorboards, David," he gasped, his strength suddenly failing. "Under the floorboards in the study, the old house." I never told anyone. His hand went limp. The monitors started to beep, a low, steady drone that signaled the end of the world. Nurses rushed in. I was pushed aside. I stood in the corner of the room, watching them try to pump life back into a man who'd been dead inside for years. I didn't feel grief. I felt terror. The old house, the house I was currently trying to sell, the house where I grew up. I walked out of the facility before they could call the time of death. I got into my car. I drove past the high-rises and the palm trees. I drove toward the only place I had left to hide. The truth wasn't in the will. The truth was waiting for me in the dark. I didn't go back to the palms to hear the time of death. I didn't need a doctor to tell me what I already felt in the marrow of my bones. The world was heavier now that Elias was gone. I drove straight to Hibiscus Lane. The old house stood like a tombstone in the middle of a manicured lawn that was slowly turning to dust. I still had the keys. I always had the keys. The air inside was stagnant, trapped in 1998. It smelled of mahogany polish and my mother's perfume, lilies and something sharp, like ozone before a storm. I walked past the living room where we used to pretend to be a happy family. I walked past the kitchen where Sarah and June used to do their homework while I watched them with a quiet, simmering envy. I went straight to the study. This was his sanctuary, the place where the door was always locked, the place where the $30 million empire was built on the backs of people who didn't know better. I moved the heavy oak desk, the one I'd promised myself I'd sell for 5 figures. My heart was a frantic bird trapped in my ribs. "Under the floorboards, David." His voice was still in my ear, wet and rattling. I found the loose plank near the corner, tucked behind a floor-to-ceiling bookshelf. I used a letter opener to pry it up. The wood groaned, a long, high-pitched scream that echoed through the empty house. Beneath the dust and the spiders lay a small, rusted metal box. It was heavy, too heavy for just jewelry or cash. I sat on the floor, my expensive slacks getting ruined by the grime, and I forced the lock. It didn't snap. It crumbled. Inside wasn't gold. It was a stack of medical records, a bottle of pills, unlabeled, and a handwritten journal in my mother's script. I opened it to the last entry. The date was 2 days before she passed away. "He won't let me leave. He says if I take the children, he'll make sure I never see the sun again. The medicine he gives me makes my head swim. I can't remember my own name sometimes. I think he's trying to erase me." I felt the room tilt. The long illness hadn't been an illness at all. My father, the great Elias, had been drugging her. He'd spent years slowly poisoning her mind and body until she became a ghost in her own home. And I was the one who helped him. I was 12 years old. Yeah, and he'd give me the little white pills to put in her tea. "It's her vitamins, David. It helps her feel better." I had been his accomplice since I was a child, and he knew. He knew that I would eventually grow up to be exactly like him. That's why he let me steal the inheritance. That's why he let me isolate him and lie to my siblings. It wasn't because I won. It was because he was passing the torch of his own damnation to me. My phone chimed in the silence, a text from Sarah. The hospital called. Dad is gone. Where are you? Why aren't you answering? Mark and I are at the airport. We'll be at the house in an hour. The house. They were coming here, to the scene of the crime, to the house where I was currently sitting on the floor with the proof that our father was a monster and I was his favorite monster in training. I looked at the box. I looked at the journal. I could have burned this too, just like I burned the letters in the dunes. I could erase her all over again. But then I saw something else at the bottom of the box, a photograph. It was me, a toddler sitting on my mother's lap. She was looking at the camera, but her eyes were screaming. On the back, in my father's cold, precise handwriting, the one who stayed, the one who understood. He didn't love me. He recognized me. He saw the rot in me before I even knew it existed. The inheritance wasn't a reward for my loyalty. It was a payment for my soul. He wanted me to have the money so I would have something to lose when the truth finally caught up to me. Outside, a car door slammed, then another. Voices, Sarah's sharp, authoritative tone, Mark's low, angry rumble. They were on the porch. I scrambled to my feet, shoving the box back into the hole, but the floorboard wouldn't sit flush. The wood was warped. The secret was too big to fit back into the dark. David, Sarah's voice echoed through the hallway. Are you in there? I stood in the center of the study, the shadow of the desk, stretching toward me like a grasping hand. I had $30 million. I had a signed will. I had everything I ever wanted, Loïc. And I have never been more terrified in my life. The doorknob turned. I didn't move. I just watched the door creak open, knowing that whatever came through it would be the end of the man I pretended to be. David, what are you doing in the dark? Mark stood there, his face red from the flight, his eyes searching mine. He looked at the moved desk. He looked at the pry bar in my hand. The facility said you left before he died, Mark said, his voice dropping an octave. They said you didn't even stay for the body. I opened my mouth to lie. I had a dozen stories ready. I'm a broker, I can sell anything. But then I looked at the floorboard, and I realized the twist wasn't just what Elias did. The twist was that he didn't die peacefully. He had called them. Before the silence took him, he had sent one last message. We know about the will, David, Sarah said, stepping into the room behind Mark. She wasn't crying. She was holding a phone. And we know what you did with the mail, but that's not why we're here. She looked at the floor. He called us this morning. He told us to look under the desk. My father didn't give me the secret to keep. He gave it to me so they could find me holding it. The silence wasn't my weapon. It was the trap he set for me 30 years ago. The air in the study turned to ice. Mark stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the gap in the floorboards. I gripped the metal box tighter, the rusted edges digging into my palms, drawing blood I couldn't even feel. Give it to me. David, Mark said. His voice wasn't angry anymore. It was hollow. It was the sound of a man who had already grieved for a brother who wasn't dead yet. It's nothing, I lied. The lie tasted like ash. It's just some of Mom's old things. I was cleaning out the desk before the sale. Sarah walked past me, her heels clicking on the hard wood like a ticking clock. She didn't look at the box. She looked at the desk. She reached out and touched the mahogany surface where our father used to sit and play God. He told us everything, David, she whispered. On the phone this morning, he sounded so lucid. It was like the dementia just vanished for 10 minutes. I felt a cold sweat break across my neck. Oh, what did he say? He told us you'd been hiding our letters, Sarah said, turning to face me. Her eyes were red, but her gaze was a scalpel. He told us you'd been telling him we'd moved on, that we didn't care. I opened my mouth to justify it, to tell them about the 30,000 feet they lived at while I was in the dirt, but Mark snatched the box from my hands. I didn't fight him. I was tired. The weight of the silence I'd built was finally crushing my chest. Mark dumped the contents onto the desk, the medical records, the unlabeled pills, the journal, the photograph of our mother. Silence fell over the room, a real silence, not the manufactured one I'd been selling. Sarah picked up the journal. She read a page, then another. Her hand began to shake so violently the paper rattled. He killed her, Mark whispered, staring at the records. He didn't just let her get sick. He made her sick. He looked at me, his face twisting into a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. And you knew? You were there. You were the one who stayed, David. Did you see it happening? I looked at the floorboard. I was 12, Mark. I didn't know what the pills were. But you knew later, Sarah snapped. You knew when you were prying up this board. You knew when you were making him sign that will. She threw the journal at my feet. He told us one more thing, David, before he hung up. My heart stopped. The room seemed to shrink, the walls closing in until there was nowhere left to breathe. He said he knew you were lying to him about the letters, Sarah said, her voice dripping with a strange, dark pity. He said he'd known for months. He saw the mail in your trunk once when you left the keys on his nightstand. I felt the world tilt. He knew. Every time I'd told him Sarah was too busy, he knew. Every time I'd told him Mark didn't call, he knew. Then why? I gasped. Why did he sign the will? Why did he give me everything? Sarah stepped closer, her shadow falling over me, because he said you were the only one who truly deserved his legacy. She looked at the box, then back at me. He said Sarah and Mark were too much like Mom. They were too soft. But you, he said you had his blood. He said you were the only one who could handle the weight of what he did. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Elias hadn't been a victim of my manipulation. I had been a victim of his. He let me steal the inheritance because it was the ultimate punishment. He wanted me to have the money, the houses, the land, because he knew that once I took them, I would be tied to his crimes forever. I was the vessel for his guilt. I was the designated heir to his rot. We don't want it, Mark said, his voice trembling. The money, the properties, the accounts. You can keep it all, David, every blood-soaked cent. He walked to the door, not even looking back. We're calling the police about the medical records. But the inheritance. Oh, that's your prison. Enjoy it. Sarah followed him out. She stopped at the threshold, looking at me one last time. He didn't love you, David. He just recognized you. The front door slammed. The sound echoed through the empty house. A final, definitive period at the end of a long, dark sentence. I stood in the study, surrounded by the remnants of a 30-year-old murder and a 3-year-old betrayal. I was a multimillionaire. I was the sole owner of a real estate empire. and I was utterly, irrevocably alone. A week later, I stood at the cemetery. The Florida sun was brutal, bleaching the color out of the flowers. There were no mourners, no Sarah, no Mark, no June, just me in a casket that felt far too light to contain a man like Elias. The priest muttered words about peace and rest, but they sounded like a joke. As the coffin was lowered into the sandy earth, I looked down at my hands. They looked exactly like his. I realized then that I hadn't just put him in a nursing home. I had been building my own, the palms for my soul, where the air is 65 degrees, and the only visitor is a ghost who knows exactly what I am. I have $30 million, and I would give every penny of it to hear a phone ring that I actually wanted to answer. But the phone is silent, and the silence is the only thing I have left to spend. I am the one who stayed, and now I am the only one who can't leave.